pumped to have my old friend Chinkara Singh online with us. How you doing, Chinkara?
Hey, Maurice. I'm so happy to be here and to see you again. For all those people who can't see Maurice, he looks exactly the same.
No, so do you. I mean, it's been almost, what, 15 years
At least.
we'd seen each other in person, and it's a trip. It really is a trip. You found the fountain of youth, dadgummit. But just for the audience's understanding, Chinkara has this very awesome background related to production and making movies and commercials and all that great stuff. And currently, she's the senior vice president and group director and broadcast production at Area 23. Now, when I saw Area 23, I thought it was kind of one of those alien things, man. But
well, we are different.
Are different. I can't wait to delve into that, because in the discussion that we were having when I initially reached out, it was, man, you actually break the mold of how you go about that. And what I loved is that you did production with a purpose. And I love that. So we'll get into that, but I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience a little bit about your background, who you are, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this career path is not something that someone would say, oh, yeah, I'm going to go be a broadcast producer at an ad agency. It doesn't roll off the tongue when you're about to graduate college, right? So it's very niche. And I knew a lot of broadcast producers, we joke, it's like, we feel like Liam Neeson and Taken. It's like, I have a unique set of skills. So I was very interestingly that my parents could never, they never gave me a video camera. So I never even touched a camera until I was in college. And then when I did, and I chose comms and broadcast comms and film, and I got into radio, television, and film production. That was my first time touching a camera. Now, I was lucky enough to work at a TV station right out of high school. And my parents had told me, like, hey, we can't afford college for you. You got to pay for it by yourself or get a full ride. So I started working at a TV station to kind of understand a career path that I might be interested in, because I did love watching TV. And then I always loved my executive producer. I'm like, I love what she does more than what I'm doing in front of the camera. I enjoyed watching Tracy and all of her dealings. Like, executive producer, what is that about? So I went into RTV, I got a full scholarship, and I was very lucky, but very dedicated to the craft and my studies. And my professor, who I'm still friends with, said to me, like, you have a really unique eye. I don't know where you've learned this negative space or storytelling through a lens, but do you realize that you're doing that? And I said, no, but I love watching TV and I love movies. And I love, I guess storytelling through the lens was a big part of my studies and where I focused. Documentary storytelling. So I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. And so my parents, even though I paid for school on my own, got my full scholarship, they were like, absolutely not will you be a documentary filmmaker. So I had to kind of leave it on the side, and I pounded the pavement with my demo reel. And again, lucky enough to get to BBDO, one of New York's biggest ad agencies, and moved to New York, where I met you. And I said, I'm gonna get in here. I'm gonna find my way in. I was just looking for production, like places that had an RTV or film department to just insert myself in. And so they needed an associate producer, and I was hired. And that was the start of a great career. So I looked at it always as a career and not as a job. And I became a broadcast producer at BBDO at 21.
Oh my goodness. And see, this is a funny thing. That's when I met you, when you were when that young. and you were ripping it up, but I didn't realize you were ripping it up. I honestly thought when you were over there, you were doing something with the Ford Talent Agency or something that was associated with being in front of the camera. I had no idea until some of the further discussions. But even now, even years later, I didn't realize how involved you were with that, building that story and telling that story. So it was fabulous to hear that the professor recognized that talent. I'm just wondering, how did he or she, I don't even know, he or she, he mentored you through that process to even get that bold to be able, I mean, New York's not a friendly city. It is when you get there, but
it's interesting that you say that. And there was so much mentorship, and I have to give a shout out, George Bagley, still one of the best professors of all time out of the University of Central Florida. And he stuck with me after graduation, and I would call him on the phone. I'm like, this isn't working. And he's like, look, a career takes time. Right. You just graduated 3 months ago, which feels like forever to a 21-year-old without a job in New York City, but it will come. And it did. And then as it came through, I was like, well, what if I do the film telling on the side, like the documentary films on the side? He's like, yeah, you can do that. And I did those 48-hour film projects, which I would recruit everyone to be in those films. I'm like, hey, we're going to shoot a film this weekend. Why don't you come on down? Just sign here. I did. You're right, though. I did have to leave the in front of camera behind. So you're right that I did do modeling and acting for most of my life, which I found really fun. But I found it more interesting and a better use of my thinking and my brain, and to be behind the camera. So I've done both sides, but it was hard to leave it behind. Here and there, I get in front of the camera if I have to.
You know what I think is really interesting is, it seems like so often as we interview people and talk with people, very, very successful people, is there's always, I don't know what you would call it, maybe those nudges in life where somebody tells someone else, like in your case, you had this person who told you something about yourself that you didn't even realize about yourself. Yep. And so I think it's so important that we kind of integrate that into our lives, is let people know when you see excellence and when you see things about them, because he probably assumed that you already knew that you had that talent. You know what I mean? He probably was like, oh, I'm just telling her something she already knows, but you didn't. And that little nudge created such an impact on your life.
It was incredible. And when he found out that I'd never even picked up a camera before, I was like, oh, this is my first time. Yeah. I was just trying to imitate what I had seen on screen, what I was interested in film. And I was very into independent films at the time, and still am. But you're right. And I think that when you have somebody who believes in you, then you can do the same for others. And you say, hey, did you unlock this potential in yourself? Or can you level up here? Because I see you moving in that direction, but you have to be driven to take it. And that's the thing about me. Like, I'm so driven that it's just a redirection of energy. It's like, okay, put your energy here, put your energy there, Chinkara. Like, you're barking up the wrong tree here, but over there's a nice tree. And so I always had that way about me, that it was success was always part of my DNA. And
I love that term, level up too. That's really cool.
Yeah, because we are the best version. We always want to be the best version of ourselves, and leveling up to, you feel it, right? When you hit like 40 was a big one for me. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to level up here. But then it hit where you're like, okay, I think I actually did it. I graduated into this next version of myself, which I'm proud of.
I just to hear, I mean, just knowing where we were when we first got to New York, to hear that you just said you're in your 40s just blows my mind. First of all, again, you look exactly like you did back then, but it's amazing how quickly time passes. And I am glad to know that you were on both sides of the camera, because there's one thing that you had said, and I'll get back to this in a minute. I have to tell this dorky story, but when I went to Utah for a time, someone said, you ought to consider going in acting. I thought, not even close, man. And they go, well, looking like you could get work. I go, what do you mean looking like, there's not a lot of you over here. And it's like, probably wasn't the most politically correct way to say and sign up. And I remember going for slating and then getting onto some commercials. I played a sumo wrestler with weight loss.
Oh, so you did it. Okay.
You know, I did
That's
it.
cool.
I've been in a few commercials, but it was so crazy because it was, you definitely felt like you're a product. Fortunately, I had stuff that I was doing. It was something I did for fun, but usually you got in there and people were treated very much like a product going through that process. Now, it's a long way to get to this question. Is you have that unique opportunity to have been on both sides of the camera. And one thing that you had mentioned is that you definitely care deeply about people. I'm wondering how that influenced it, being on both sides of the camera, and then how do you interact with all sides of the production as you're filming, and how do you make it, for a dorky way, make it one?
Make it human too.
Yes.
Absolutely. We were talking about that when we first spoke, Maurice, and production is, I mean, it's grueling, and you've been on set.
Yeah.
And then you think about the people who do it every day and back-to-back shoots. And then you compound that with COVID, when they weren't working for months on end. These people who are used to working back-to-back 18-hour days, maybe they take a 2-week break, when their body is just tired. Right. And they need to catch up on sleep, sure. But then when COVID hit, it's like, wow, that salary, because everybody's freelance basically and contracted, just went away. And so then they were like, well, I can't take the opportunity to catch up on my sleep or being tired. I just got to push to get my rent paid. And humanizing production during COVID became very real, and making sure that everybody was heard and cared for and there with a purpose. That to me means a lot. Even the actors, I like to just kind of talk to them a little bit and see, where their background is, maybe what acting school they went to, and just have the conversation, because the shoot is the fun part. And I always want to make sure that we're having fun and getting the job done, of course, and getting the shots we need. I always like to say, shoot the board, and then let's get the extra. So there's a way to just you make that production culture a little bit more human, and down to the call sheet. There's one production company that I spoke to recently that had every crew member's headshot there on the call sheet, which I thought was really cool. It's like, this PA is arriving 5 a.m. and here's what they look like. So you can be like, hey, I saw you on the call sheet. You got here at 5 a.m. Well, thank you so much for being here at 5 a.m. to, make sure that I had my individual catered breakfast wrapped up and my silverware. There's a person behind everything in production, and it's a 100-year-old institution. So there are opportunities better and even more sustainable. If we look at production, and it's like a one-time use culture, it's like, okay, we're on set in a temporary location for X amount of days, so I can use 10 water bottles a day and just put it in the recycling bin. Let's hope there is one. Yeah. Right.
The behind the scenes stuff. Gary, you have that corny smile going. That's always a question coming up, man. Go ahead.
There's a word that keeps coming up, and that's purpose. And I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but Marie said production with a purpose, and you've mentioned it a couple of times yourself. What does that look like at Area 23? What does production with a purpose mean to you, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I always say that I love my chief creative officer. I think he's a brilliant, smart man, and he's the leader that I can always follow. He'll probably hate that I even say it. You know, he's a humble person. He's a smart person. He always knows what he's asking of you, and the challenges are always right up my alley. But he walks the walk. And then when you have a leader like that, you know, the trickle down effect is real, and you have permission to say, okay, I'm Indian, and I would like to have more diversity in my group. Like to have more diversity at the agency. I'd like to have more diverse directors that we work with, or production partners, because those people aren't seen. And you know, we make sure the cast is diverse, sure, but what about behind the lens? And he champions, his name is Tim Hockey, he champions those efforts. And I am very empathetic. I want to make sure that, I mean, I had this very amazing experience. I want to make sure other people are having this amazing experience and have this opportunity to come to a TV set and learn what that's about. So he also volunteers his time to make sure that diverse communities know about advertising, know that it's an opportunity for their career path. And so I think that at Area 23, there's eye to diversity and inclusion. And I met with someone recently who made the distinction between diversity and inclusion. And she said, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And I love that so much, because I was like, exactly, like it's become a buzzword.
Right.
In a time where we really need to know what the definitions are, and then we need to implement them. So to us at Area 23, it's making sure that we can tell a story from all perspectives, and create an environment of inclusion to tell a story from all perspectives, and be brave enough to say to our clients, like, well, what about this? And what about this group of people? Let's consider them.
Yeah, that is a gutsy move. There's no doubt about that, because and especially when there's so many differing opinions on what that includes nowadays. But
Right.
I agree with Gary. I wholeheartedly jump on the bandwagon. Diversity is being asked to the dance, and invited, and then inclusion being invited to dance. Gary, you had something else there?
Oh no, I was going to say, I love that
Yeah.
just that phrase alone carries so much power.
It does.
Yeah, and
I
it's
think- I think
Sheila's phrase, so I'm stealing
Yeah.
it. But wow, it meant a lot to me too. It meant a lot to me too.
Well, and I think it also kind of leads to something else, or kind of just another mindset of, you know, a lot of times when people become successful, or they get into a position where they have some power, or however you want to phrase that term, is they can kind of go down two pathways. They can go to kind of a scarcity mindset, where I've made it and I've got to hold on to it, and I'm going to keep everybody else down. Or they can kind of go to the abundance mindset, you know what I mean, where there's enough for everyone. And it sounds like what you've been able to accomplish, and what Area 23 has been able to accomplish, is that abundance mindset. And, you know, all the successful people and all the successful companies that I've ever seen that have long-term success is those that can tap into that abundance, kind of all ships rise mentality. And it sounds like you guys have nailed that.
Yeah, and abundance is the key word. And I love that you said that, because there is room for everyone.
Yep.
There's
Totally.
work for everyone. And there's a seat at the table for all backgrounds.
And it's usually better when that
lifestyles.
happens. You know what I
I
mean?
think, yes, I do, because I remember I was talking, my husband's also a creative director, and talking to him about how I felt like maybe I was conditioned a bit to looking at a director reel one way. I knew it was good work, of course. But then I also had this side of me where I was very into Akira Kurosawa and a lot of independent filmmakers. The movie Russian Ark, I was like, a one take, what? And I thought that, you know, there was, but also like Harmony Korine, you know, these indie filmmakers who were just like doing crazy things. And the the look through that lens was intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And I said, why don't we bring this into commercial advertising? But I just realized that what I was looking in commercial advertising in those reels was not the diversity that I was looking at in the independent films, like the makers.
Mhm.
So then when you get people like Mindy Kaling or Aziz Ansari and Issa Rae making that show Insecure and carefully selecting Black creatives to be behind the scenes and the makers, wow, you could really see it watching that show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the feel that I'm getting watching that show Insecure was just palpable, and I loved it. I just craved more and more episodes because I wanted the feeling of that film, and the culture of the women. I was just eating it up. It was so real because it was made by the people that were in front of the camera and behind the camera, and the writers. Some of the writers were Black and then brown, and you know, we had a diversity angle that was captured in the makers too, and that was brought into the film, and it was just I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, and I love seeing that diversity in the makers provides a lot of a diverse perspective when you're the viewer and what you're taking away, and that realness and authenticity that I was craving. And now it's just the time when we're able to do that unapologetically.
Yep.
And present reels that are different and unique and have like diverse makers behind it and a commitment to diverse makers. I love it when production companies say like, Chinkara, like this was for a women's product and shot by a female director, and you know, we got the whole crew was female too. Isn't that so great? And I'm like, it is. That's hard to do.
Totally.
Grip work is hard, and there's not a lot of female grips. Like it's just very physical labor, and I was like, I applaud that. The makers, a lot of, but you have to be a broadcast producer or some kind of person that understands production to really understand how monumental that is.
It is, and you have brought something up. It's almost like a psychotherapy session. You made me go way back when I was growing up. I was I've mentioned this before. I grew up one of the only Asian kids in Utah. So I love my $6 Million Man. I love those other those things. I was a child of the 70s and the 80s, right? And I just remember watching those shows, but my mom's from Japan, and she would introduce me to a lot of movies that were from her era. And when I first looked at them, I thought, man, this is whack.
Right.
This is really crazy Japanese movie stuff. And then when I saw from her perspective and I started to understand different things that she did, through movies, as dorky as this might sound, I started to understand my mom in a very different light. And then it was interesting because then I started to welcome those movies into my life and see how they intersected. There was one movie with Charles Bronson and the Mifune guy from Japan there. And it was a blend of the cultures. It was the first time I'd ever see something so crazy like that, and how they incorporated the cultures together and how these incredibly different individuals became unified at the end. Even though one of the main characters dies, that's beside the point. It was that deep respect. And so when you're saying this type of things in the movie, the behind the scenes movie, it's amazing the power that you have to really bring people together, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, to divide it profusely, right? But it really did take me back to that time, as you were mentioning all this, the power of movies, the power of it coming from people that are really feeling it versus pretending to feel it or trying to interpret something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way you show up at home and your background, I've never had success separating that from the way I show up at work. Other people can, and more power to them. But I think that when you if you show up the same at home and at work, and you're just authentic to yourself, no matter what environment that you're in, you can bring so much more to the table. And I think that producers do affect really quick change. And we do so because an idea is thought of, and then they're getting into a place where the idea is becoming real, and they're going to go make the idea. So when you need to make the idea and start that engine, that's your producer. And your producer, I mean, in a movie sense, the producer is a little different. And in a broadcast perspective for advertising, it's the place where like the engine's starting. And so the producer is accountable for bringing in all of those forces, the director, the editor, the visual effects company, sound designers, music. And if that producer is not introduced to a diverse group of folks, or had a mindset where they want to include diversity, then how could that ever be handed over to the creative teams for an example of who to work with and why? So I always make sure that, I mean, during COVID, we had the opportunity to do all these virtual screenings. So we went around the world. We had curated months. We had, a lot of Black owned business, Hispanic owned business, LGBTQ creators and owners that we've screened with and then worked with. And it was so successful because we were flexing that muscle of introducing these companies to producers, because producers are like that quick change that happens, because it's the one time you hire in women-owned company or a Black-owned company or South Asian company, then that change has been made, and you start to enjoy what you're making, and the different look that it brings to the table. And I'll just touch on quickly that we worked with this one animation company in Eastern Europe. And when the conflict in the Ukraine broke out, one of the producers, when we were having status, was saying that they were working with this company. And I was like, wait, hold on. Aren't they in Latvia? Don't they have Ukrainian artists? And it was a very human moment where the producer was like, yeah, they do. And actually, they're having a really hard time getting these artists out of the Ukraine. So we started, I begged them to start a Kickstarter or GoFundMe. I think it was a GoFundMe. And we just passed it around to the whole agency until we got enough money to get these artists out of Ukraine. And they had, pregnant wives that had to get new doctors. And we care about the people who are making these pieces with us. They're our partners and they're people, and we care about them very much. And I think that just, it is also a women-owned company. So anything we can do to bring more humanity, more diversity. I mean, it's just the way we grew up. And Maurice, I grew up the same way you did, because when I watched Bollywood films, I finally understood why my dad dances like that. I was like, what's going on with this guy? Like, we would go to weddings and we would do this like, daddy-daughter dance. And I was like, what is he doing, Mom? And then I would watch
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
I was like, what is he doing? And I appreciate him. He's a very unique man, even for Indians. But I do appreciate like where he came from in the culture and the drama, because you look at Bollywood films, it's so much drama, and it is kind of a way of life, and it's all okay. And so, yeah, I just don't try to separate that anymore. It doesn't work as well as just combining it all into my authentic self at work.
Gary, I'm going to go over to you as Chinkara has been talking. I'm just getting this very humanizing feel of what you do. I don't know if you're feeling the same way, Gary, but just knowing what I know of Hollywood or the periphery of Hollywood and what you're doing here, it's a whole different experience. You're teaching me a lot here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why not, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of I saw a video a while back. It was with Denzel Washington, and he was kind of talking, really kind of echoing what you're talking about, in the sense of how important it is to have both sides of the lens have that inclusion, have the people not only invited to the party, but allow them to dance. Because I think it's so interesting. You said that, your industry is what, about 100 years old, give or take. And it's taken this long to kind of understand that only certain people can bring that culture and nuance to life. And why did it take us so long to figure that out, that we just needed to get the right people in the right room and let them dance? It's funny, I keep having flashbacks to Footloose, but
Yeah,
we got to dance, or whatever he says. But
yeah.
But and the thing that I've, so during COVID, I was actually on the border working in on the Mexican border, working in a hospital down there. And I can tell you that anytime I've been immersed in a culture, I've never come out the back end not having a greater appreciation and understanding and a love for the people. And it sounds like that's what's happening, at Area 23 as well, is on the backside, you become more humanistic. You get to know the people as individuals and the great people that they are and what they have to offer. I don't know. I think it's just amazing. I think it's really cool.
I actually met a lot of my coworkers through COVID, and there were just more opportunities, like these virtual happy hours that we would have to connect and say, hey, I do that too. Or people saying, Chinkara, I had no idea that you had 3 kids. And I was like, yeah. And then they would, be in a meeting and one would just like appear, and they were like, you have kids? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do. I have 3 boys. And so they had no idea. And I remember this one coworker, and I just adore him so much. When we were in a very important meeting, we had a timeline, we needed to work on a schedule that was like a year out, and we really needed to be precise. And my youngest at the time just started crying out of nowhere and just needed comfort from his mom. I say from his mom because his dad is very comforting, but he chose not to go to his father and came to me. And so I had to just spend, 10 minutes comforting him, and my sweet coworker just waited. And, many people would drop off the line and say, look, ooh, kid crying, I'll let you go. Right. And this person said, no, I'll let you be a mother for 10 minutes and comfort the child. He ended up falling asleep, and we jumped right back into it. And I was like so touched, because I said, this person wasn't afraid of life and motherhood, and still could take a moment for me to do what I needed to do, and then continue on with the meeting. So I didn't have to stress about, oh no, they just ended the meeting and now I have to call them back, and I have to put this kid away or down. Instead, he's like, just hold him, you do it with one hand, we got this. And I was like, wow, that to me was just such a beautiful moment of work people being kindness and empathy.
It is, and it is a big deal, that empathy. You've effectively shown us right here, right now, how you humanize filming. I hear so many nightmare stories on occasion, but in this case, you're showing that there are those productions that really do take that into deep consideration And maybe that's, well, not maybe, I guarantee you that's why you've been so successful. Your company has been so successful because you do care. I mean, when I hear what you were talking about of you're so vested in your people's skill development and so on and so forth, you're right there with them. Love it. Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. And the other thing too, I have to thank you for is that you help us through this conversation to burst the assumptions that we have about each other. When you have that many people online, they go, oh, maybe they're going to come in this way because they're this or they're that. When you realize, no, it's just a different point of view from a whole different experience. And you were wrong in what your assumption was, but it's not a point of you were wrong as much as coming together, you quickly realize that there are different points of information that you didn't have. And
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Maurice, you said something in a previous podcast that kind of just bubbled up in my memory. Is you said that many times diversity and inclusion becomes weaponized. And I think one of the things that really stands out with our discussion today is the pure nature of what diversity and inclusion can look like. The positive, you know what I mean? Like, to me, this is so natural. It's so empathetic. You know, it takes something that can be weaponized and makes it really a beautiful thing. And I think it shows the true spirit of what diversion and inclusion really should be.
Yeah. You mean diversity inclusion?
but many times, and you know as well as I do, Maurice, that diversity and inclusion oftentimes is a separator.
Yeah.
And it tears people apart in the, you know what I mean, in that process.
Yeah.
And you know, you're showing us how this really should happen.
You're hitting right here. You can't really. You're hitting right here.
But it's a hard conversation to have with people, and sometimes, I mean, there's probably a million things that I said in this podcast. I said it the wrong way, right? But did I talk about it? Yes. And did I start to use the muscle of thinking that way? I did. And that is what is so important, that we're all talking about it. And I'm on a couple of committees at work, and also part of the DEI committee for the AICP, which is the Association for Independent Commercial Producers, and as an agency representative on that side. And you know, the conversation, some white friends did come to me and they said, well, why don't all these people from these diverse backgrounds speak up more? And I said, well, because of the decades of not talking, what do you want us or them to do? Like, it takes a minute to find the voice. That's why allyship, advocacy, and the conversation has to start from somewhere, even if you are saying maybe the wrong things here and there. I think giving yourself grace, giving others grace, and it's almost like apologizing a little bit up front. Stop me if I'm saying anything wrong, and then I'll quickly correct myself and I will move on. And being okay with that, making your own mistakes, because a life, you know, lived full of mistakes is better than just like sitting stagnant. And
so I love that saying. I love that.
It's a famous saying. I butchered it, but it's a famous saying somewhere. And and I think that, like, the more we talk about it, I remember back in the day where I was like, hey, could we think about maybe like diversity in the cast in terms of like, could there be an Indian person or a Southeast Asian person? And they're like, well, Chinkara, we don't have a doctor role. And I'm like, right. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what? We are not just doctors. So just the conversation itself is so important to have and talk about, and talk about with each other, talk about at work, talk about an angle that we can use. There are so many mentorship opportunities that we can bring to the table, and what if scenarios. And that's another thing I love about Area 23 and working with this chief creative officer, because he operates on a culture of what if. Well, what if we tried this for accessibility for people who are low of hearing or cannot hear, or low of sight or cannot see? Or what about these children who have cystic fibrosis? And with our client Woozer, we were able to make that really cool project Sick Beats, and that all based on this culture of what if we could make this better? And when it always lights something in you, because the creative teams are thinking what if, and these big creative ideas, which are amazing. And I'm thinking, well, what if we made production better? What if we talked to makers around the world? Well, what if we had curated months for our screenings where we talked to Black-owned business or women-owned businesses, or LGBTQ creators? What if we had all these creators in places that we're reaching for partners, and then we think about them top of mind, and then they become folks that we work with on a regular basis. And there's this Black and Latino owned company that I just love called Baby Lion, and Digby and I used to shoot a spec spot in his living room in LA in 2 a.m. And we kept in touch, and he created an amazing company. And look at us all these years later, as we're working together, because I'm like, there will be an opportunity, this will happen. And we came together to make it happen. And I'm just grateful for the conversation. Absolutely grateful. I'm sad about how we got here a little bit.
Sure.
And that there is such martyrship to get here, to inject the conversation into our everyday.
Right.
But I hope those people know the work that we're doing, so it's not completely in vain.
Exactly.
And we are moving forward in a positive direction in all aspects of our work. And so production is one that, while you don't see it very often, you see it in the credits, and you see it in the behind the scenes shoot.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a behind the scenes shoot?
Yeah.
I remember I was seeing like, oh, look at all those, I don't see a lot of diversity back there. So being able to be like, here's a female grip. Honestly, grips, like it's hard to be a female grip. So I just point to that a lot, because it's a very difficult place to exist as a female. And so when you have that in the behind the scenes, that's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible. And I love production companies that have an eye to that, because it is production for good, and it is making us better, and it is making production more humane and human and empathetic and inclusive. And I just love it. And I think that there's a better way for all these folks. And it shows with the work.
Yeah. But I
have to believe that it does translate to the final product that people are seeing. It has to. Having that behind the other side of the lens is definitely going to translate to the final product that you guys are making.
Yep.
Yeah.
Chinkara, what I've got to thank you though for is just a whole shift into seeing what goes into entertainment.
Sure.
Of course I've been there, but when you hear what you're doing, and you're really bringing it in, as Gary said, in a way that really makes sense. It's not a push, it's more of an invite. And I love it. You invite in the conversation, the what ifs. I'd rather live with many mistakes, rather be stagnant. There is so many Chinkara-isms in this right now. I love it. So, but I cannot thank you enough for sharing your experiences and your time with us today. It's been
absolutely fun. If I could be anything, I would want any minority, female, mother, wife, to just know that they can do it too. And they can have that voice, and they can sit at the table, and they can talk about what's important to their heart and meld it with what they know is right in their head, and move forward in any type of business to do what they're passionate about, and to make sure it's fair.
Yeah.
And I think that will give us the passion to move forward, especially when we're working at home and our kids are on top of us. And it's like, what is my purpose?
Yes.
Right. And it's not just checking boxes, and it's not just making the video. It's making the video with purpose, or giving your job purpose with what matters to you. And if this matters, then you can do it.
Yeah. You are
Thank you.
fantastic. I can, again, let's do this again. I know I'm going to be reaching out and invite you to some other things here, so watch out.
Part 2.